So the wedding speeches, this is something you should give a little bit of thought to. Everything from who's going to speak, to when the speeches are going to be, to how long the speeches are actually going to take. So firstly, are you actually going to have wedding speeches or not at all? Every day is different. There are no rules to a wedding day. A lot of people, the thought of doing wedding speeches is actually quite daunting. It's a little bit scary to them. Other people, they love putting a microphone in their hands. They're happy to talk for a long time. So if you're thinking, I'm actually just really uncomfortable with the fact of having to do a speech, you don't have to do a speech. We've seen people do things in so many different ways. Everything from not at all, there was absolutely no speeches at the wedding, to a couple who, when they rang the bell, they gathered all of their friends and family into a foyer. They stood up in a couple of steps together, said a quick thank you. It took about 30 seconds. They actually used the opportunity then to take a group photo of everybody. And that was it. There was no other speeches, just a brief thank you. We've also seen people, as they've entered into the room, stand up, thank the room for coming, and that is it. So if you're looking at an option of not having speeches, that's okay. If you're looking at just doing a thank you, that's also perfect. Or you might want to go all out and go traditional and have the few speeches that can last anything from 20 minutes to an extended amount of time. So if you decided to do a speech or not do a speech, do communicate this to key people. And this can be the fathers, the best man, or anybody else that's actually expecting to stand up and speak. If you have decided you're not going with a speech, do remember to explain this to people who might have expected that this is part of their role on the day, so that you're not getting into the situation of an impromptu speech. The father of the bride just is not taking this on the day saying, what do you mean there's no speeches today? He grabs a mic and off he goes. Or if you are having speeches, and we'll get into this in more detail, just communication to people who's expected to give a speech, who's not expected to give a speech, whatever way you want to run the speeches yourself. So let's talk about who's actually going to give a speech. The traditional way would be to have the two fathers or representative from both sides of the family, the best man and the groom. But because things change and everyone has their own ways of doing things, yes, we see that more often than not, but it's kind of a free-for-all in a sense that anyone can give a speech. Anyone that's close to the bride and groom can actually stand up and say a few words about them. This is everything from the mothers as well as the fathers. The mothers we've actually seen do a speech instead of the fathers. We've seen bridesmaids get up and do everything from a snappy poem to a full-on speech to actually singing a song, to the bride is now actually also standing up a lot more often and giving a speech. This can be the bride gives a speech independently to the groom, the bride and groom give a speech together where they stand up together and they have a speech prepared that they deliver as a couple, or the bride and groom give separate speeches. So when it comes to who's actually delivering a speech, it is an endless combination when it comes down to it. We have seen everything from just the best man give a speech because nobody else was comfortable giving a speech, and the bride and groom wanted everybody to kind of enjoy the day and not put any pressure on them, to the larger numbers actually giving a speech. But you may want to consider the length of time a large number of people delivering a speech will take, and as well as that, the number of people speaking. You're exposing the room to speech after speech after speech, and even though they might be delivered really, really well and they could be quite snappy, the more people that stand up and begin a speech, the room's kind of thinking, and another one, and another one. So these are things all to consider when you're looking at who's actually speaking. So that brings me to the overall length of time the speeches can run for. We have seen weddings where the speeches have run for 5 minutes, and we've seen weddings where the speeches have run all the way up to 2 hours. There might be a reason for them going on that long. It could be something like you're just very comfortable giving a speech. The person delivering it has an amazing delivery. They're actually very entertaining. Or it might be your only child getting married. So this is your one and only chance to actually stand up and speak on behalf of the family. But if the speeches do run on a little bit longer, and this is kind of going the hour and a half, the 2 hours, there is things to consider. Where is this time being taken from? Nobody really plans for speeches to go that long because nobody intends on them taking that long. Usually when people are planning speeches, they're kind of giving a window of say 20-30 minutes, which is really the optimal time that seems to work for a room for keeping people's attention. If they go on for a much longer length of time. This can impact the running of the day. When I say the running of the day, this can impact the time the band can now set up. This can impact the way the venue is actually running the banqueting room. So the food has to be ready to come out. If your speeches are, for example, 2 hours and they're before the meal, the kitchen is not prepared for this. The kitchen needs to be able to run a smooth and efficient way of serving all those guests with food that's going to be really, really tasty. So if your speeches go on very, very long, they might not be prepared for this. We've seen venues where they're actually very proactive with this, and they will ask people to give estimates of how long they think the speeches will take so they can inform the kitchen. And we've seen venues where they're actually extremely strict on the time that the speeches can go on for. They have a strict policy of 20-minute window for speeches, no longer. If they go on longer, they're now bringing out a course and they're serving the course while the speeches are still happening. So everywhere is different, and these are things to consider when you're actually looking at the length of time the speeches will last. So as well as that, things to consider are repeating yourself. And when I say repeating yourself, it sounds a bit silly, but if each person that's actually presenting a speech gets up and thanks the exact same people over and over, this is just going to eat into unnecessary time. What is good is to actually coordinate beforehand and say, right, the groom is actually going to thank all the suppliers, everyone that was involved in the day. So that way it's not a repetition of each person that stands up thanks the same person over and over. Another thing can be props on the day, and this can be something small and really entertaining. Anything from a really funny prop that's going to embarrass the groom and the whole room is in reams of laughter, to full presentations where there's a PowerPoint running. And there's a couple of different ways this can be done. We've seen a best man have a PowerPoint, and the PowerPoint was actually part of his speech, and it was just reiterating the really funny stories he was telling about the groom. Or we've also seen the PowerPoints where they've been presented after the speech is over, and this is like a standalone speech in itself and can eat into a bit of extra time. So do actually consider this. And when the PowerPoint presentations are actually happening, this can be anything from a slideshow of photographs to a bit of music, a bit of embarrassment to the bride and groom, or it can actually be video messages from friends and family from all over the world, which is really nice, or it can be a really funny video that's a surprise to the room. So there's all different ways these presentations can happen, but as I said, it is like a standalone speech, so do actually account for this when you're trying to make out your timing when it comes to actually delivering the speeches. So when the actual speeches will happen is something to think about. You may have a preference to when you want the speeches to happen yourself, but do actually communicate with your venue, because they may actually have rules, and the rules can be there's no speeches allowed before the meal because they don't want to run the risk of upsetting the actual kitchen and the order of food coming out. So we've seen everything from speeches happening before the meal. The good thing about having speeches before the meal, if the venue are okay with it, is if anybody's nervous or if anybody's a little bit anxious about actually delivering a speech, once they go into the room, the speeches are done, the speeches are over with, and then they can sit down and they can enjoy their meal and not have to think about it. Another way we've seen, and this is becoming more and more popular, is once you've come into the room, they serve a course, everybody eats one course, and after that one course, the speeches then happen. This way, everybody that was feeling a little bit hungry is fed a small bit, they're a little bit happier, they're a bit more relaxed in the room, the speeches happen, and then the rest of the courses come out. And then there is the option of doing a speech, a course, a speech, a course, really breaking it up, or maybe doing 2 courses, all the speeches, 2 courses. There's different ways of doing this. And again, this is all communicating with your venue, what's allowed, what they would recommend. And I suppose it depends on what's on the menu as well, what type of food you've actually decided to go with. And then the last one is the more traditional sense. And you always hear this when the fathers of the bride stand up, they go, if it's before the meal, they always say, we're going to break our tradition and we're going to have the speeches before the meal today. That's because the more traditional way was to have them after the meal. After everyone's fed, people get up, speak, entertain the room for a couple of minutes. But the thing with the speeches after the meal, one thing I would say to you is people tend to be a little bit more comfortable, so they can tend to take a little bit longer. And then the other thing is people may have had a couple of extra drinks, so they might be a little bit looser with what they're willing to share with the room. But that's a kind of a gamble you're willing to take. That's fine. It depends on who you know is speaking as well. So when it comes to actually when the speeches are happening, and actually one I didn't mention, and I don't want to go away from it before I do, is people are actually having their speeches in the drinks reception. So before the bell calls, they'll gather everybody around, they'll set up a mic system, and they'll actually do the speech in the drinks reception. The same amount of time, the same amount of people, the same kind of running, everyone's kind of standing around enjoying a drink, listening, and then they'll move everybody into the banqueting room. So that's another one that we've seen that works really nice, and especially for summer weddings, I've seen people do it outdoors, and it's really relaxing and kind of refreshing for people. So there are all the different options we've seen when it comes to when you're actually going to have your speeches. But do have a think about it. So presenting a gift in the wedding speeches, this is something that some cultures do and other cultures don't. This can be usually a token that's given to, say, the mother of the bride in the form of flowers, or it could be something given to the fathers, and it could be a framed print of somewhere that they actually had, say, a family holiday. So these are all little things to consider. We've also seen a really lovely thing where the bride actually presented her own bouquet from the day to, it was a family member that was very, very close to her, and the emotion from the family member was really, really special to watch, because I think because it was actually the bride's bouquet being given to her was such a lovely moment. So things to actually think about when you're giving gifts to people is, and I know this sounds a bit silly, but make sure they're actually there and on hand to give to them. We have watched people look for gifts time and time again. This happens more often than not. So make sure you know where they are. If the venue's looking after the gifts, make sure the venue have them on hand to actually present them to the family members. And as well as that, and I've seen this a couple of times as well, make sure when it comes to, say, a floral gift, that the actual gift was ordered, because I've seen a couple of days where they went to give the flowers and then realised, oh my goodness, I actually never ordered the gift to begin with. It was a bit of a laugh at the time and they kind of moved on from it. But these are all things that can happen because there's so much going on in the wedding. These small little tokens can kind of get a little bit forgotten about. So as you've probably noticed, I do love to talk myself. So I'm not the one to tell you to keep your speeches short. But in saying that, do consider a few factors when you're planning the speech section of your day. Everything from the length of time. How will this affect your venue and the food service? How will it affect the band or entertainment coming in later on that day? Who are you asking to actually do a speech on your wedding day? And are they comfortable being put in that situation? If they're not, there might not be a need for them to actually give a speech on the day. So consider all of these things. Consider the length of time. Consider who's speaking. Consider when you're actually going to have the speeches and how that will fit in with the timeline of your day. And consider your guests, how long the guests are sitting there actually listening to the speeches. Sometimes the room are quite happy to sit back for a long length of time, and other time you can actually lose the room quite easily. So these are all things to consider when you are actually planning the speech section of your day. The number of views and the response we've gotten so far from everyone has been absolutely amazing, and thank you so much for everyone that has actually taken the time to watch these videos. But please do subscribe to the channel, give us a little bit of support, show us a bit of love by hitting that subscribe button, and we'll see you all in the next video.